Greetings, is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It's time to continue our discussion on D20 Modern, the modern take on the 3rd edition of Dungeons & Dragons. Where we left off, we were still talking about equipment. I'm going to talk about improvised equipment, armor, and the general gear that your character is going to have. And that's going to pretty much finish up most of what I'm talking about for equipment for you. So there's still only a few more things after that. Now let's talk about improvised weapon. Improvised weapon is anything you can wield in melee or throw that you're not going to be proficient in. You're going to have a -4 whenever you're using any of these things, regardless if you're throwing it or just hitting some with it. Now, depending on the size of the object that you're using is going to depend on the amount of damage it's going to deal. Larger the item, the more damage it's going to deal to someone, regardless if you're smacking them in the face with it or chucking them at it. Now, you can throw anything of your size on the chart or smaller, and you can wield anything of your size with one hand or anything up to one size category larger as a two-handed melee. So, one-handed melee would be your size, smaller. You could also chuck those larger than you by one size category, two-handed melee. Now, if you're throwing it, it has a range increment of 10 feet. And the damage can be altered depending on the form of the item. If it's something that would be very hard or heavy, it probably will do more damage than something if it's soft or light. Your game master can alter it according to what they think would be appropriate for said item that you're using. Now, you can apply your strength to anything of size tiny or bigger, and it will always critical on a 20. Never critical at any other time. Now, your item that you're using, if you're using it in melee, it has a 50% chance of breaking each time you deal damage with it. If it's a thrown object, it has the same percentage if it hits something larger than it. So if I hit something, let's say, small into something large, it has a chance of 50% chance of breaking. On the other hand, if I hit a large item into a small thing, it doesn't have that percentage when I'm chucking it. Now let's move on to talk about armor. Armor is anything that protects you. It can be made of any material, different shapes, different sizes, different compositions. There are really 4 types of it. Archaic armor, which is ancient or older kind of armor, the kind of armor you'd find in the original D&D books. There's impromptu armor, something that you're throwing together, or something that isn't normally meant to be armor but functions as it, let's say like a motorcycle helmet. There's concealable armor that's made to go under your clothing. It's a little bulky. It's not as bulky. It's made to be hidden from view. And tactical armor or modern day armor, which you will definitely see someone wearing. That would be something like a SWAT person's uniform, SWAT person's armor. Now, all armors have a number of statistics. They give the equipment defense bonus. This is how much this armor will provide a defensive bonus to you. It has a maximum non-proficiency bonus. This means if I am not proficient with this type of armor, it's the maximum defense out of that equipment defense that I actually am adding in. It means that if I'm not proficient with an armor, I'm adding less to my defensive value than if I would be proficient with it. It has a max dex bonus. This is my maximum amount of my dexterity I can add to my defense when I am wearing this armor I'm wearing. It will limit the amount of dexterity I can add in. There's armor penalty, which will apply to a list of spells, the amount of penalty that you get while you're wearing that armor to said skills. There also lists speed changes. So if you're wearing certain types of armor, such as medium or heavy armor, it will affect the amount of speed you have. This is assuming you have a base speed of 30, like any other normal human. But when you have that, wearing this armor, your speed or ability to run will be affected. There's also weight, how much it weighs. Of course, the purchase cost DC, and of course any restrictions that armor might have on you purchasing. Now let's move on to talking about general gear. This is everything else you can possibly have or imagine you want. Now, a lot of these things are going to be some kind of electronics or require battery power. This assumes that under normal circumstances you can recharge, replace batteries in between any kind of battle and in between any kind of adventure. You're not going to have to worry about it. There is times that you might have to worry about battery power. If it does come up, you can either purchase more batteries for DC2 purchasing cost, so it's pretty cheap there, or you can assume that when you're using an item and it might run out of battery, then you can roll a D20, and if you roll a 20, it runs out. But normally you're just going to assume battery power is okay on any of these items. Now, of course, items will have the purchase DC just like anything else. It will have a size, which will tell you how easy it is to conceal said item on you if you're attempting to conceal it. It will have a weight, and it will have any restrictions if it requires a license, just like anything else that does. Now, you can purchase used items. Now, this makes no actual difference in the way that you're using things if you're buying something used, really, unless the DC to purchase it is 16 or higher. At that point in time, it makes a difference in the price cost. Otherwise, it's just the same to buy it for the normal cost because it doesn't make a difference. If you do choose to buy something that is used, it will take you twice the amount of time it normally would to find the item. So it's more difficult to find. And the big difference is that it is cost you 1 less DC than it normally would. So if it was something that was DC 16 I'm getting used, it's 15 now. That can make all the difference in the world when purchasing something because it is one difference. But there is a disadvantage to buying something used. It's more difficult to repair. So any DC to repair said item will be 5 higher. Now you can also buy luxury versions of an item. There is no intrinsic need for purchasing a luxury version of an item. It just has a higher purchase DC cost. It's just that, ooh, look at this, I've got something fancy. Now there are a number of items that are required in order to use certain skills. I've talked about the skills briefly in the past, but if you do not get these special kinds of items, which it lists in the book, related to what skills they are, you receive a -4 penalty when using said skills. There are, of course, times and places where these won't apply. It's going to be situational. Like, there is climbing gear on this list, and you're not always going to need climbing gear, so you won't always get the -4. It's just that certain checks, you will need it in order to actually roll it, or you get a -4. Now let's talk about carrying capacity. This is how much you can carry around. You have a light, medium, and heavy load, which is determined by your strength. It will tell you your light load is just what you can normally travel around in. The big difference is when you're moving into using a medium or heavy load, it's going to start affecting your speed and your ability to move around. You're going to be limited because you're carrying a lot and it's weighing you down. Now you can lift up to double your heavy load, and that's just what you can lift up from the ground, but of course then you're like crawling along because you got the heaviest load you could possibly. It's not something that's really effective when trying to move around carrying that much. You can also push or pull up to 5 times your heavy load, so you can push or pull a good amount of weight. Now, creatures that are larger or smaller than medium, this changes their carrying capacity. Smaller things have smaller carrying capacity for their strength. Larger things have higher carrying capacity for their strength. The chart there goes only up to 29 strength, but it does have rules for going beyond that. Effectively, for every 10 you are higher than somewhere on the chart, you multiply the bonuses at each of the levels by 4. So if my strength would be 34, I would look to what 24 was and multiply those numbers by 4. So that's it for today. I finished talking about improvised weapons, I talked about armor, I talked about the general equipment you could have, and I talked about carrying capacity. In the next one, I'm going to go over lifestyles and vehicles and move into combat. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel, the Empire, and the work I do. And until the next time, I bid you farewell.